Production funding is brought to you in part by A. Reddix & Associates, a healthcare management consulting firm bridging the gap between healthcare policy and the community through education, training, and outreach. Find out more at ardx.net. Discussing the issues and celebrating the successes of the African American community. This is Another View.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Tonight, a discussion about the Lemon Project, the opportunity for the College of William and Mary to examine its role in slavery as well as race relations from the end of the Civil War until today. One of the leaders of the project is Dr. Robert Vinson, Associate Professor of History and Africana Studies at the College of William and Mary. Welcome to the program, Robert. How are you?
Thank you very much, Barbara.
Good.
Wonderful. How are you?
I'm fine. So, who is Lemon?
Lemon was a person that we don't know much about, but what we do know is that he was an enslaved person owned by the college in the late 18th century, early 19th century. All we have is that name Lemon.
So you don't know if that's his first name or his last name?
We don't know that.
A little disrespectful just calling him Lemon.
And that's what we're left with, Mr. Lemon. That's what we've gone with, Mr. Lemon. And we know that he had a long-standing relationship with the college because at some point he's getting gifts from the college. In 1806, the college is buying produce from him in 1812, and
so
they pay for a coffin.
Did he become a freedman then if they're buying produce from him? Or
right, it seems that way, and that's one of the exciting things about the project. We want to know more about him. There are these tantalizing clues about his relationship with the college beyond the fact that we know that he was enslaved. Whether he actually earned his freedom, it appears that he may have, but that's one of the things that we want to verify. When the college pays for his coffin in 1817, apparently when he dies, we don't know what exactly that means. Is that because he's still enslaved, or is that in recognition of his long-standing relationship, free and enslaved, with the college? We hope to find that out as we go forward.
So how did this project come about? Give us a little bit of background in terms of what process the College of William and Mary went through to start the Lemon Project.
In some ways, Barbara, it's been many years in the making because we have had individual faculty members, graduate students, undergraduate students working on aspects of the college's relationship with slavery. What we're doing with the Board of Visitors resolution in April of 2009 was to acknowledge the college's role with slavery. The college actually owned slaves. The fact that the college was actually founded on revenues from tobacco revenues. From tobacco taxes, and who was producing that tobacco? Enslaved people. So we can say that the college may not have actually come into existence without those revenues derived from that tobacco tax.
And if people don't know, William and Mary is the second oldest college in the country.
Second oldest college in the country.
Okay, and it started in what year?
1699.
1699, okay.
So we're in our 5th century. And to know that the college actually started with revenues derived from slave labor, producing tobacco.
So have you been able to discover that buildings on campus were built by slaves?
Yes, some of our most prominent buildings, the Wren Chapel building was early 18th century. It's the oldest continuously used building, educational building in America.
Wow.
That's one. We take all of our students, prospective students, to that building. I teach in that building. We have graduation ceremonies in that building. The President's House is another building, but built with slave labor. The Bradfordton building, which is where our provost works, chief academic officer. And we think the Alumni House, which we think was built in the 1850s, and if it was built any time before the Civil War, chances are there was some type of slave labor used. So some of our most prominent buildings on campus, we suspect strongly slave labor.
Were any of the slaves actually educated at the college?
Yes. The Bray School, which was started in the 1760s, was actually used to educate enslaved children. And we think that is the first actual educational building for enslaved people in the United States. So when we're making these discoveries, and it's very exciting to really confirm that, to add more detail to it, but that's what we have. These are really historic features of the college.
So in 2009, the college actually made a formal resolution.
That's right.
And it said?
And the resolution said the college acknowledges the fact that William and Mary owned slaves, profited from slave labor, exploited slave labor, but also that after the Civil War, that the college excluded blacks from attending the College of William and Mary until 1963. So we're talking about a history of enslavement, of course, but we're also talking about a period of Jim Crow where there was exclusion. And so the college has acknowledged that this is what happened, that some of the greatest defenders, intellectual defenders of slavery were actually William and Mary presidents, faculty members. And so not only did the college own slaves, profit from slave laborers, but actually intellectually defended the practice of slavery, and then throughout the Jim Crow era excluded black people from attending the college. So it's acknowledging that, and it's determined to right that wrong by acknowledging it, doing the historical research, and re-engaging the black community, particularly in Williamsburg, who have long memories about these sort of exclusionary practices, and basically say, we acknowledge that this happened, we're not denying it, we're going to dig more into the history to find out what happened, and we want to make it right.
So the ultimate goal then of the Lemon Project is to, one, discover all of that history, or to put it in one place, is that
That's
correct?
one part of it, is to get the historical record right.
Okay.
Right, and first we have to do that historical work. And then we also want to go to the black community, particularly in Williamsburg, but also the larger Hampton Roads area, and say, we're acknowledging what we've done in the past. We want to, if you will, reset the relationship. And some of that is determined by what the community wants from us.
What is the relationship today, would you say?
I think the relationship is better than it has been historically. We have more faculty of color than we've ever had. We have more students of color than we've ever had. So on some levels, the relationship is even better than it has been in the past. I think when we talk about staff members, there are still concerns. I mean, the long histories of exploitation of staff members up until the 1970s being treated.
Let's talk about some of that. Specifically, are you when you say staff members, you're talking about the cafeteria workers?
The cafeteria workers, the janitors, who were treated for many years as temporary employees, even though they may have worked there for 30, 40, 50 years.
Meaning
Why?
they got no benefits or anything?
Yes. Right.
Really?
So that they would not get benefits, so that they would not get Social Security. Now, these practices, we believe, stopped in the 1970s, but there are still people retiring from the college who started as temporary workers, even though they were clearly permanent workers. So for staff members, I think non-professional staff members, there's a feeling that the college has exploited them, and that these kinds of wrongs still need to be acknowledged and made right.
Have you heard from those types of people, staff members, meaning that in terms of, since this Lemon Project has started, that what their reaction is to it?
Yes, we've heard from a few staff members, very elderly, most retired, and particularly their children. And their children talk about the fact that sometimes they have to support their parents, because even though their parents worked all of their lives, the Social Security, the benefits were not there. And so they feel that. So the children, this is being passed down to the next generation now. The children have to take up the financial slack because the college dropped the ball.
Have you gotten any pushback? Has anybody said, you know what, let those, as my uncle says, sometimes you need to let those roots stay in the ground?
That's right. That's right. You inevitably you get pushback from people who say, let the past be the past. Let's bury the past. Why are you digging this stuff up? It's only going to cause more trouble. I'm a historian. You can't say that to a historian because I feel that we want to move through the past, but first we have to acknowledge it, we have to set it right, we have to understand what the past was. And then we can wrestle with it and then have the potential to move through it. And I think it's extraordinarily disrespectful to tell folk who were exploited to say your history doesn't matter, what happened to you doesn't matter. We have to acknowledge that. That's a big first step because that's the root of people's feeling of disrespect, is that their pain is not acknowledged. And so that's the first step that we're doing. And then the next step is to say, okay, we've got the historical record, we're acknowledging this publicly. What can we do to make this right? And that's the piece where the community is coming in to weigh in on how we can make it right.
And they're weighing in now?
That's right. What we have established is a very new project. We're really just getting off the ground. But we have a steering committee made up of faculty members, staff members, professional and non-professional, a few students, but particularly community members. And those community members will be in the decision-making process when we detail the history and we say, now what? How do you want us to be involved? Is that being involved with tutoring and mentoring programs for young people? What does that look like? Does that mean scholarships? What does that mean? Does that mean collecting oral histories, using the resources of the college to better retain the history of Black Williamsburg? What does that mean? And so we're deliberately not defining that part of it.
Let the community
because we want the community to come in. Because again, that's important when we talk about a form of acknowledgement and reconciliation and reparation. We have to let the folk who have been victimized, if you will, to determine what makes them whole. Right?
Now, okay, let's go back to the history for a little bit. What have you found out so far in this process? What have you been able to uncover?
Right. So this is what we know so far, beyond what we've talked about with the revenues from the tobacco taxes. What we do know is that presidents owned enslaved people. We know that students brought their enslaved people to the college
to take care of them while they were students.
To take care of them while they were there. Right?
Wow.
We know that the college owned a plantation in the 1770s and held it for a couple of generations. We know that they used that plantation to raise revenues when the school was in economic trouble. We know that professors owned enslaved people. And we know, of course, as I mentioned earlier, that the intellectual community at the college, particularly professors, were the foremost defenders of slavery in the South, particularly the president in the 1830s and 40s, Thomas Roderick Dew. So this we know. We do know that there were more enslaved people that the college owned in the 18th century, less so in the 19th century. By the time we get to the Civil War, the college owns only about 5 or 6 slaves.
So was the mindset changing at that point, or?
It had everything to do with the fact that the college was in economic trouble, right? And so it reflected the economic fortunes of the college. So even at this time, right before the Civil War, the college is an intellectual leader in the pro-slavery arguments. The college itself is becoming more impoverished, and so you don't have the plantation. You don't have as many people actually owning enslaved people. So it's down to about 5 by the time we get to the Civil War.
What happened to the plantation?
It was sold. It was sold, I believe, in the early 19th century. I would like to say the 1820s.
To raise revenue?
To raise revenue, right. And that's all we know about it. So we have these bare outlines of the history. And again, the exciting part is we're just getting started, and we have many people on the case to find out more, to actually add a little bit more meat to the skeleton. But that's what we know.
Wow, it's just fascinating history.
It is.
To find out what was going on. After the Civil War, and then when you get into the Jim Crow era, there was a concerted effort then to keep blacks out of William and Mary.
That's right. The idea was that just because there was freedom for black people, many people did not feel that they were equal. And so freedom did not mean equality, did not mean that black students could study right alongside white students. Now, of course, the college itself was closed for a number of years after the Civil War. I mean, this is a continuation of its economic distress. And so there were no students of any color in the late 19th century, and it was only when the state takes it over and it becomes a state institution in the early 20th century that it starts making its economic climb back. But even in that period, of course, there are no black students until we get to the 1960s.
The relationship then with the community, because I assume then that these workers, these temporary workers and others came from Williamsburg.
That's right. That's right.
From the black community there. Was that was pretty much the only economic or place of employment? Or were there many, did they have many choices, I guess is what I'm asking.
That was before the 1930s. That was the largest possible place for employment for black Williamsburg. Of course, with colonial Williamsburg being started in the 1930s and 40s, with the Rockefeller family coming in, now colonial Williamsburg became a large employer. But even with colonial Williamsburg in the mix, the College of William and Mary has been and still is perhaps the largest employer for blacks in Williamsburg. So it's a big deal. I'm
curious, as an African-American professor, hearing this history and knowing what happened at this institution where you currently work, how does, from a personal perspective, how does that resonate with you?
Well, it was an eye-opener. I've only been here 4 years. My family's from this area, but I'd never lived in this area up until 4 years ago. So I came in knowing very little about the college's history, beyond the fact that it's the second oldest college in America. But clearly, as a historian and as a black person, as a descendant of enslaved people, this resonates with me. I have deep passion for it. On one level, I'm curious as a historian, as a professional historian, but as a black person, clearly it matters to me, and I think it's so important that the college has actually made this step, because acknowledgement is hard to come by.
I was going to say, that was a huge step, though.
That's right.
For the college to actually step out there.
That's right, and to commit resources.
Exactly.
To dig into this. So I'm excited by that. I'm optimistic about that, and we'll see where it goes.
Where's the trust factor in terms of Black Williamsburg right now?
I think there's a healthy degree of skepticism. This is unprecedented. The college has not had this relationship with the black community of openness, of admitting wrongdoing. And so this is all very new. And so I think there's a healthy skepticism, but also I think there's a sense of optimism as well, to say that maybe there are pieces in place with resources, with the leadership of the college, with people who are running the project, that perhaps this is the moment where our stories can be told. And that's what we hope will happen.
Why is Lemon, Mr. Lemon, the focal point if the college owned many enslaved people? What was it about him that kind of, allowed you to draw from that, from his experience?
Right. Well, on one level, the enslaved people of the college are like the enslaved people throughout the nation in many ways. They're anonymous. Right. We don't have names for most of the enslaved people. We happen to have a name with this one person, and even those details are sketchy. The fact that there was a long-standing relationship too, we were interested in that piece too. So it's really giving a name to not only the person named Lemon, but also he's a symbol for all the other enslaved people who unfortunately we don't have names for yet.
Have other, because I know there are families, Lemon families in the Williamsburg area. Have you been able to determine a linkage?
That's one thing we want to do, because we have found these various Lemon folk, and so if anyone's out there listening, we're all ears, because you're right, there are a number of Lemons in the area, and we think there possibly could be a connection. And so we're interested in finding that out. Stay tuned.
It's very interesting to me as I travel around Williamsburg, and I know that there's this influx of northerners, of new people coming in, but of people coming in from other parts of the country, because they realize how beautiful it is and so forth. And I think they have a little different relationship in terms of Williamsburg versus those families that have been there, as you call it, Black Williamsburg, from a long time. Do you think collectively this will just help kind of bring the entire community together?
I hope so. Many of the come-heres, they're called come-heres, and I guess I'm one of those.
That's what they call the come-heres.
Folk who come, and so that come-here designation, you could have been here 50 years ago, and you're still a come-here, right? So that's how deep the roots are for Black Williamsburg. Many of the folk who come are retired, have resources, are interested in this history, and want to be involved. And we hope that this project brings together these different strands of Black people in Williamsburg, but really all people of goodwill who are involved with this project, who want to know more about history generally, who come to the area because they love the history of Jamestown or colonial Williamsburg. But this is part of history too.
This is part of the history.
And increasingly we have people who understand that and want that story told.
Do you think that because I know that this happens, administrations change, new people come in and so forth, but that this project will be allowed to maintain the legs that it needs to come to fruition, to really, so that you can gather all the information? Right,
I think so. The present administration in place now is very supportive of this project, and we were concerned about that because really, this was really put in motion with the previous administration. The previous president, Gene Nickel, and the previous provost, Jeff Weiss, sort of set this in motion. We have a new president and a new provost, and we were kind of looking like, what will happen? And they actually said no. we want to go forward with this. This is good work. We're going to commit the resources to doing this. And so we've been very encouraged by that. So the skepticism of Black Williamsburg was met by the skepticism of many faculty members who had been there for some time. And it's some testament that you have that many faculty members, staff members involved with the project, with the sense that, yes, these guys are serious.
These are not all just African-American professors either. No. I mean, this is a mixed group of people
White
working
professors,
on this.
all kinds of professors, and that's the wonderful thing about it. It's just not people of color who are interested and excited. It's a wide range of folk of every color, every gender, etc., that are interested, and that's heartening too. Because if it was just Black people doing this, then you kind of wonder, okay, how broad is the support?
How broad can it get? Sure.
But it is very broad-based in the community and otherwise.
So if you live in Williamsburg, or you don't live in Williamsburg, but you want to get involved, what do you need to do in terms of contacting school? Or will there be forums, or what will happen?
Right. So we will have regular fora. We had one in the spring, and we'll have another one in the fall to serve as sort of an update on the historical information that we're finding out, but also to invite people to weigh in. If they have a particular oral history or family history that we should be aware of, or ideas of what we should be doing with this historical information, then that's great.
And that's what you want to hear. And you'll come back and keep us abreast of what's going on?
We would be happy to do so.
I really appreciate that very, very much. And I know we also had invited Kimberly, your co-chair, to be with us, and she couldn't today, but we want to have both of you back to continue to update us on what's going on with the project.
Wonderful.
Okay, thanks so much for joining me today. I appreciate it. And when we come back, it's a love story of unselfish giving, and it will warm your heart. But first, here's a look at what's happening in Hampton Roads. Welcome back. Have you ever met someone who was so kind-hearted and giving that you felt they should be sainted? Well, you're about to meet a Virginia Beach woman who many would put in that category. As our Lisa Godley reports, she not only gives of herself, but is a living example of what the phrase paying it forward really means.
Growing up, Beverly Hill never imagined herself surrounded by this many children.
I was a tomboy. I was nowhere near thinking about having any kids.
But as time went on, things changed. She married and had 2 daughters, but then divorced. She'd spend the next few years raising her girls and working as a nail technician. Then one day, a client said something to Beverly that changed her life forever.
She said, you'd be a great foster mom. I'm like, not me. I don't see me as a foster mom. I mean, I just barely got my 2 children out the door. She goes, no, you would be a great foster mom. So I became a foster mother for about 12 years. And then the Heavenly Father said, these ones here that you have, you need to keep them because they need stability in their life.
Beverly knew being a single mom with 8 daughters wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that God wouldn't have told her to adopt them if he wasn't going to provide.
I've never really had to ask for anything. I've never had to borrow anything. He's always been there for me. It may not be everything that we want to eat, but it's food on the table.
You'd think she had her hands full, but Beverly's the type of person who says, if I've got a dime, then you've got a nickel. Sherry Brooks is thankful that she is. Beverly took her in when Sherry lost her job and found herself homeless. She was 19 years old at the time.
She's my mom, my sister, anything that I need or that I need to talk to somebody about, I can go to her. Her experience is from the heart. She's just one of the greatest people I've ever met. My mom actually came here when she was alive to her house where I lived, and it was a pretty difficult situation because she was really more of a mom than my mom was. And her family and her children, I mean, all of them, they're just great. And I don't know where I'd be, but I'm glad I'm here.
Sherry wasn't the only young woman Beverly took in, and her good deeds didn't stop there. All of this food on the grill isn't for Beverly's crew. This barbecue is part of Beverly's monthly mission to feed the homeless.
They're down there waiting for us.
Once a month for the past year, Beverly, joined by friends and family members, come to different locations in Norfolk and Virginia Beach to feed the homeless. Some of that good recently came back around when Beverly became a newlywed. She says her new groom knew all about her large family and exactly what he was getting into.
I've always told everybody, my children come before anybody. My family comes before anybody. If anything happens, I'm right there. You can ask me for anything, and I will give you the shirt off my back. I mean, if I can, I will.
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
Very busy household.
And I know Beverly's kindness firsthand. She was my nail technician at Nails Etc. in Virginia Beach and always had a smile and an encouraging word. And Beverly, I still have the bracelet. That's our program for this evening. Please visit our website, anotherview.tv, and sign up for our eView newsletter. And if you're on Facebook, become a fan of Another View. Next week, your favorite pundits sit at the Another View roundtable talking about the issues from an African American perspective. It's sure to be lively. We'll see you next week for Another View.
Production funding is brought to you in part by A. Reddix and Associates, a healthcare management consulting firm bridging the gap between healthcare policy and the community through education, training, and outreach. Find out more at ardx.net.